Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Friday, July 21st. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 43 days. The game against Michigan in 127 days. If you were listening on Tuesday this week, we did a listener question show on Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning, which is not something we typically do. That's typically something we reserve for Buckeye Weekly. But when we put out a call for questions for Buckeye Weekly, it was a tidal wave of questions and lots of really good questions. So we've already done 2 episodes of Buckeye Weekly with listener question shows, and now we're going to do a second Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning episode with your listener questions, because this is all the stuff you want to know, so this is the stuff we're going to be talking about. So my guest once again is Buckeye Weekly host, Buckeye Huddle beat writer, travel coordinator, whatever, Tony Gerdeman. Tony, I guess let's start with this one from @Stovebender1388. If the offense isn't starting the most experienced quarterback, which would be Tristan Gebbia in terms of at least college experience, because Kyle McCord is more talented, why are they starting Steele Chambers over CJ Hicks? Is that not the same situation? I think it kind of is. That was from @Stonebender1388. Tony, your thoughts?
Boy, Tom. Yes, experience doesn't mean you're better, but having more talent as a young player, like I'm not convinced that you can have a bunch of athletic ability, but that's not necessarily football talent and football discipline and understanding your role. So in terms of, CJ Hicks not being better, being more talented than Steele Chambers, he may be, but can he do the job? Because Kyle McCord can do the job, and he's more talented than Tristan Gebbia. So I think that's the difference there is, Tristan Gebbia has more experience, but he's not as talented as Kyle McCord. And CJ Hicks doesn't have the experience. He may have more potential, but I don't know that you can say he's more talented than Steele Chambers, who's a 2-year starter at this point and more productive and more reliable. And part of the problem last year with the defense is that the coaches were learning on the fly what guys couldn't do. And so I think there's a value in having guys out there who what they're going to do and who'll also know what to do. So I think I don't see a similarity here, because Steele Chambers is very talented and very productive. And so I hope CJ Hicks plays more. But just because you are the 5-star guy, like, you still have to show that you belong. And if you couldn't get on the defense last year, like, you could not get a single snap on defense last year, I don't think that's just coaches not playing you. I think you weren't ready. And so what makes you think he's now suddenly better than Steele Chambers?
And I think there's also a delineation we need to make here between experienced, meaning graduated high school the longest ago, versus experienced in the system that we're talking about. For Kyle McCord, yes, he has played fewer college football seasons than Tristan Gebbia. However, Kyle McCord has been in the Ohio State system longer than Tristan Gebbia. Devin Brown has been in the Ohio State system longer than Tristan Gebbia. That's a lot of meetings. That's a lot of film study. That's a lot of learning the playbook, all that kind of stuff. That all matters. I mean, especially at the quarterback position, but that all matters, where now these guys don't have to think about it. For on the defensive side of the ball, it's the same defense for the second year in a row. So those guys, Steele Chambers has been the starter at Ohio State, and he's been a starter in this defense already for a full season. So it feels like that's something where you're going to, if that may be a little bit of an if it ain't broke, don't fix it situation, but also, I don't think anyone is suggesting that Steele Chambers' spot on the defense is the only spot that CJ Hicks could play. You may see him play there. He's going to be one of probably the top 4 linebackers along with Cody Simon. But also, we keep hearing that he may be getting worked into that jack role. And, he's in that mix with Mitchell Melton. That's something we didn't see at all this spring because, of course, Mitchell Melton was hurt. So they basically decided we'll just kind of put that off till the summer because the guy we're viewing as the potential starter there, he's not ready to play. So that's something they're going to be working in now. So I think it's way too soon to make any kind of guess as to how much CJ Hicks is going to play, because they're certainly viewing him as a possibility there. we haven't seen it. They haven't seen it really because they didn't do it this spring. So, I think you are going to see substantially more CJ Hicks on defense this fall. Is that at the will linebacker spot? Is that at the jack spot? Is that somewhere else? We'll find out. But, I think that, again, as Tony said, if one guy was viewed as a starter last year by the coaches who are seeing these guys far more than we are, far more than you are, then you kind of have to assume one guy was viewed as a starter, one guy did not play a single snap on defense. You got to assume there was a fairly substantial gap there. That gap should be closing now that it's CJ Hicks' second year at Ohio State, second year in this defense. But there may, that gap may still be there. But yes, I think you are going to see plenty of both Steel Chambers and CJ Hicks this fall on defense.
I do think you could ask if CJ Hicks played all of the snaps that Steel Chambers was going to play this year, would he have better numbers? Like, would he have maybe more tackles for loss and things like that? And I think he might, but would there also be more mistakes? And I think the answer is yes. And you want to mitigate the mistakes. But like I've also said, probably the same way, like I won't be surprised if CJ Hicks has more impact plays, like more tackles for loss or more sacks than Steel Chambers, because that's kind of what his job is going to be this year, I think. But I also do expect him to play quite a bit and be a real contributor to the defense. He is going to be part of this thing.
And I don't want to seem like I'm picking on this particular question asker. I think this is more of a broad statement, but I think there are going to be, when you have the Venn diagram of CJ Hicks should play over Steel Chambers and Ohio State needs to be smarter and give up fewer big plays and not be so, be a little more risk averse than they were last year because they took a lot of chances. They got a lot of 3-and-outs, but they also gave up a ton of big plays. Those are two things. If we're assuming that CJ Hicks is probably going to be at least slightly more mistake prone than Steel Chambers, those are two things that you can't necessarily reconcile. If you're going to kind of be a little more conservative, a little more safe, try to avoid mistakes, avoid big plays, then Steel Chambers may be your guy, and CJ Hicks being in that jack role, maybe that's a spot where he may be a better fit for what they're trying to do this year. So, this is one of these situations where there's a lot of angles, and I feel like we could probably talk about this for another 10 minutes and come up with other different angles to this, but there's a lot of different angles to it. I would certainly not expect CJ Hicks to, at least at the beginning of the year, be the starting will linebacker. It feels like they are looking for a role for him on this team. I think he's going to have a role on this team. I would just expect if Steel Chambers is healthy, if Tommy Eichenberg is healthy, those are going to be your two linebackers, and Cody Simon may be the third guy because he's, again, if healthy, he's one of the veteran guys who is going to be in that role, in that room. So just something, there you go. There's a much longer answer than you were probably expecting to that question, but there you go. Next one from @Terry Slusher. I have a hypothetical question. What if, ... what if Lincoln Kienholz would have enrolled early, balled out at the spring game? How would that change the quarterback competition? Just hearing he has something special about him.
I don't know that it changes materially what happens. I think everybody would have loved to have seen him this spring and enroll early and get things going, but I don't think it pushes back his progression because he's going to be able to be eased into things. I also think that, we've all heard that the coaches really, really like him and there's something about him that they love. They love his competitive nature, but also they love Devin Brown's competitive nature. They love Kyle McCord's competitive nature. So I think if he came in and lit it up, I guess let's define lit it up. If he outplays somebody, then congratulations, you might be the starting quarterback at Ohio State. But if you just ball out in a spring game, that's 1/15 of spring camp, and there's still 25 more fall practices to go, and so it would have just been fun to talk about. Which it becomes fodder, it becomes something to talk about, and it becomes a guy for people to latch onto and to gives them people a hill to die on. So that's great.
Nothing like really, really entrenching your position. If we've learned anything from Tony, from World War I, Tony, it's you want to really entrench your positions and throw yourself at anyone who disagrees with you. That's the best way to approach anything in war or in life or on the internet. I think there's a disconnect probably between fans and coaches and how things are viewed in terms of the spring game. How often do we say the spring game is 1/15 of spring practice? And it's not even the most important 1/15 of spring practice. The coaches will view that as a significant marker just in terms of, can these guys do it when there are fans in the stadium and all that kind of stuff? You're not just doing it in front of your teammates. But a lot of times they will view individual scrimmages as potentially more impactful in terms of decision making than the spring game. There's lots of reps. They look at every single rep all spring. So yeah, the spring game is not the only thing. But in terms of him really balling out, even if you say really balled out all spring, a true freshman quarterback, maybe he raises the ceiling. If he was definitively better than the other guys, maybe he raises the ceiling. How often do we say, though, a true freshman quarterback is going to lose you a game or two? Are you willing to, how much better does he have to be than the older guys to be willing to potentially take that risk of, this is a guy who might lose you a game or two just based on inexperience and all that? And you also have the transfer portal thing. If you start the true freshman, well, the two guys who are ahead of him are, how excited are they going to be to stay in the program? And you're potentially starting all over with your quarterback room if you do that. So I think there's a lot of, if he had been in this spring, I think that changes how much he plays this fall. I don't think that, I think there's a lot of stuff that would have been potentially going against him in terms of who was the actual starter this fall. All right, and last one from @Dr_Tubbs, Tubbs with a Z. I will substitute my rambling with this. What is your Mount Rushmore of coaches with the most interesting personalities with Big Ten Media Days coming up next week? I feel like this is a very topical question for us.
I have to go back to like sort of time and place. Like the 2012 Brett Bielema, for instance, would be on my Mount Rushmore because 2011, 2012, in that 2010 era where, as I've said before, like he would come to Big Ten Media Days and say something, allege that Ohio State did something improper, and then Barry Alvarez would have to come out that later that day and apologize, and then Brett Bielema would issue an apology, and then Jim Tressel was only going to snap back so much, but then Urban Meyer comes in, he's not going to put up with it. So give me like 2012 Brett Bielema on there. And then I'd say arrogant Mark D'Antonio, I think is a good one. When he's feeling his oats and you've come off a win against Michigan and, you can do no wrong, or he can, he's the king of the castle. I go back to like 2006, Terry Hepner, Indiana head coach. I just remember that was my first Big Ten Media Days. And back then, like the coaches would just sit around tables and like he had a table full of people and it's like, Indiana, who cares? But like everybody was just locked into what he was saying. So I think he was an interesting one, but like that's only three, but I wouldn't put Scott Frost up there. Now, no personality, maybe.
Yeah, boy, you put a Mount Rushmore of Scott Frost and Jim Harbaugh, and boy, there's been a few notable no thank yous on that note. The less personality filled Mount Rushmore, shall we say? I think you've got to put Mike Leach up there just because you can ask Mike Leach. You got R.I.P. to a real one. You could ask him just about anything and you'd get an interesting answer. I recently bought a book about the Native American chief Geronimo, which was written by Mike Leach. So I have not read it yet, but it is on my nightstand. Just that is not typical college football coach behavior to write a book on something like that. He famously, of course, was very into pirates as well. So get a little. He was an attorney at one point. Like he's got a little bit of it. Had a little bit of a different perspective than other people. Lane Kiffin, I would have put Lane Kiffin up there, and I've talked to people who have covered Lane Kiffin, and they said it's not as whimsical as you think it is. So maybe not. Dana Holgerson is if coaches are too conservative or too cautious about what they say because they care what other people think. You drill a hole through the earth, you come out the other side, and that's where Dana Holgerson lives. He I think would be on that list. Holgo, he's down at Houston now. He was at West Virginia, of course, for years. Big Ten, I think this is not someone who's going on my Mount Rushmore, but I think that James Franklin is very different than you would, watching James Franklin on TV. James Franklin does not come across as a particularly interesting person. And then when you sit with James Franklin for an hour at Big Ten Media Days, you come away thinking, oh, this is a really insightful, thoughtful person. He has some. I always really enjoy talking to him. I'm dibs on James Franklin next week. But he's not necessarily on that list, but he's someone who I think people would maybe view as come away with a different impression listening to him talk for an hour than you would just watching him on TV. One more. You mentioned Mark D'Antonio. Let's talk a little John L. Smith. John L. Smith. I was there. Everyone remembers the coaches are screwing it up rant at halftime after the 2005 blocked field goal return for a touchdown by Ashton Yebote at Ohio Stadium. I was one of, 10 to 15 people maybe in a small portable trailer, like the kind of trailers that they, when your school runs out of space and you need to have extra classrooms and you have like the small portable trailers outside. I was one of maybe 10, 15 people in there after the 2004 game, where that was at East Lansing. And that was the one where Ted Ginn scored touchdowns 3 different ways. They did run, he had a punt return, and then he had a long touchdown reception with maybe a minute left, like a 60 or so yard touchdown reception with about a minute left, split the safeties, won the game for Ohio State. And I think the post-game press conference for John L. Smith was something like 40 seconds long, where he got the first question, didn't particularly care for it, got the second question, and just walked out. And it was like, well, boy, I guess I don't mind transcribing this press conference because it's not going to take very long. But that was he. You feel like there was some personality there. Good, bad, or indifferent. There was. This was not a boring coach with no personality. So I guess does that put him on a Mount Rushmore? I don't know, but I guess he was memorable.
Well, that's more of a plaque, like at a rest stop, perhaps, like recognizing a once fiery speech, or I wouldn't call it a speech, but I'm with you on James Franklin. Very interesting guy to talk to. I think neither one of us mentioned Steve Spurrier.
Oh yeah,
so,
yeah.
I think he might be the George Washington of the Mount Rushmore here.
Yeah, he's definitely a. There is a long running series. I think it was on EDSBS back in the day. Hayton Spurrier, and it was just him just like riffs in like a Steve Spurrier voice about all these teams, and he had the real famous ones. You can't spell citrus without UT, about Tennessee going to the Citrus Bowl every year because they couldn't beat Florida back in the 90s, and I think he was the one who dubbed Florida State Free Shoes University after the Peter Warwick thing, and he might have. This is one that I don't know the provenance of for sure, but I think he may have done the fire at the Auburn Library back in the 1990s, and the real tragedy was most of his books hadn't been colored in yet. I mean, there's just the kind of stuff that you don't really see out of coaches anymore, because now it would be a bunch of angry people on Twitter yelling about how it's so offensive and you can't say that. That's terrible. Steve Spurrier was a man of his own time, and that was quite a time to be alive. I can't believe we missed him, but yeah, he's a great one as well. So hope you guys enjoyed that, and if you want much more of Tony and I answering your questions on Buckeye football, this year's team, historical Ohio State football, random nonsense that you might ask us about, road trips, all that, you can find much more of this on the Buckeye Weekly podcast feed. Appreciate you guys. If you like this, make sure you subscribe there as well. We also would appreciate you rating and reviewing us. 5-star reviews help other folks find those shows, which we always appreciate this time of year. There's always people, as we head into August, people looking for new podcasts to listen to. So if you can take just a minute to leave us a 5-star rating and review, somehow that helps. I'm not even going to pretend to understand, but the magical podcast fairies seed it into people's phones more if you do that. So If you could do that, we would appreciate it. And we'd also appreciate it if you consider becoming a member of BuckeyeHuddle.com. We're going to be we're heading into a very busy season next week. The start of this season, unofficially at least, Big Ten Media Days will be in Indianapolis for that. Lots of coverage of Ryan Day and the Buckeyes. Lots of coverage of Jim Harbaugh in Michigan, James Franklin in Penn State, plus the rest of the Big Ten. They're, theoretically, they have to be there. Otherwise, teams don't have enough people to play. So they'll have plenty of stuff to come out of Indianapolis next week. And then some big recruiting news potentially coming in the next week or so for Ohio State and much more. So you're going to want to be a member of BuckeyeHuddle.com to get insight and analysis on all of that stuff and much more. So sign up today, and we will talk to you guys on Monday.